I mentioned that David Lynch expects you to kind of figure out the relation. Figuring out the relationship between Pete and Fred is up to you. So you're going to notice some things as you go through the film about what links Pete and Fred. For example, Fred has a very tiny tattoo of a fermata on his hand, right? I can't point to it and hold the stick at the same time, but it's on his hand. It's a fermata, which is a musical notation meaning hold something for a long time. Pete has a small tattoo about the same size on his back of a four-leaf clover. Both Pete and Fred have headaches. Mr. Eddie says Pete has the best ears in the business and Fred is a musician. Fred is unable to satisfy a woman, and Pete seems able to sexually satisfy more than one woman, both Sheila and Alice. There are similarities and differences between the two guys that will. You should just notice these little things and think about the relationship between the two. Okay, cool. This is going good. Let's talk a little bit about Mr. Eddie next. Mr. Eddie, I'm sure you're getting used to these characters, but like Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet, and like Reverend Powell, and like Jack in The Shining, he's that bad dad, that dangerous dad. There's always two dads. The good dad. If we've talked about this already, but right. I mean, sometimes your dad can be a nice, comforting presence, and sometimes your dad is this terrifying guy who gives you the rules and spanks you or whatever. And it's that doubleness of the dads that shows up in these movies, where you get the good dad, Gary Busey here. He's so kind. Oh, I'm gonna go out with my friends. Okay, that's good for you, man. And he's so worried about his kid. I love Gary Busey in this movie. They used to be bikers, but now they have a station wagon. But Robert Loggia exists as the bad dad. Robert Loggia is interesting. First of all, he shows up at the beginning very much in like a stereotypical gangster role, right? Like he's the dangerous gangster guy who's, executing his enemies. And if I caught anybody messing with my woman, I'd shove this gun so far up his ass, it came out of his mouth, I'd blow his brains out. And, he's this dangerous sort of gangster guy. But what makes Robert Loggia a particularly interesting, there's something that he's not just a standard stereotype of a gangster guy. Mr. Eddie there's something very strange about him. And it's in that scene with the tailgating. He's driving the car. He's got bodyguards like you'd expect, and like a super hot woman that, no one can take from him or he'll murder them or whatever. Some standard gangster shit. The cops are watching him. They know who he is. Although they think his name is Dick Laurent, which, again, a lot of people in this movie have more than one name. And Alice and Renee and Pete and Fred, and are Pete and Fred the same person? Oh. And Mr. Eddie and Dick Laurent. So the thing about Mr. Eddie that's really important is in the scene where he's driving on Mulholland Drive, which, by the way, will take him right past Fred and Renee's house. He's driving on Mulholland Drive, and there's a guy behind him tailgating, which is when you drive a car too close to the car in front of you, and it's dangerous. And Mr. Eddie waves the guy past, like, man, just go around me if you're in a hurry. And the guy drives past, and he flicks him off. And Mr. Eddie flips out and crashes. He just got the car fixed, but he crashes it into the other car, and then drives him off the road and beats him. Now, in a normal movie or a normal situation, the idea would be that this is a powerful, evil gangster, and he deserves respect. And like the sort of the Godfather type thing is you must respect power and masculinity, and if you don't do that, you've disrespected me, and you've been, and I'm gonna have to beat you to death in front of everybody or whatever. It's the kind of like, are you laughing at me? How dare you laugh at me? You've seen gangster movies before, like Godfather and Scarface, and these guys demand respect. Mr. Eddie's not demanding respect. In fact, the guy flicks him off, and that doesn't even bother Mr. Eddie. He doesn't even say anything about the guy making this rude gesture in his car. What pisses Mr. Eddie off is that and again, you think of Mr. Eddie as being a gangster doing illegal shit all the time. And it does seem like he's making illegal porn where people die. There's like blood. So it's like people are really being killed in his movies, and it seems he's very sketchy and dangerous. No problem killing people. But what pisses Mr. Eddie off is that this guy's not following the law, which is not. It's weird to think of gangsters as enforcing driving regulations. The whole point of being a gangster is fuck the law. I'm gonna do what I want to do. I'm going to sell drugs even though it's illegal, right? But Mr. Eddie, what bothers him about the tailgating guy is that for Mr. Eddie, rules must be obeyed. Legal rules, which is not what you expect. I mean, gangsters have their own kind of code that you got to follow the rules of being a gangster or whatever and respect the Godfather or whatever. But he's mad about like tailgating, and he talks about how many car lengths does the driver's manual say you should drive behind someone when you're going at this speed. And he beats the guy up and he's yelling about statistics, about 50,000 people die in crashes on the road every year. I want you to get a manual. I want you to read that, motherfucker. It's enforcing the rules. It's very, very strange that that's what flips him out. But it's important in the movie because when you're thinking about one of the roles that you imagine a father figure as having is enforcing law and order. And that's what Mr. Eddie is doing. He's enforcing the rules. You broke the rules, and now I have to punish you. I don't want to punish you, but I have to punish you because you broke the rules. Mr. Eddie is enforcing the rules. Now, complicatedly, Mr. Eddie is enforcing the rules while also breaking them himself, right? He's allowed to do whatever. He can do whatever he wants. He's allowed to, kill people and drive people off the road. It's not legal to just pull someone out of the car and beat the shit out of them. So he doesn't have to follow he's complicated because he both doesn't follow the rules, but also enforces them. This is a kind of, if you know your psychology and Freud and psychology theory and shit, this is some classic kind of dad behavior, which is I will enforce the rules, but the rules don't govern me. They don't apply to me. I am above the law. All right, cool. All right. Oh, and then Mr. Eddie also deals in pornography, which again, it's one of those links between Fred's life and Pete's life is unmarked videotapes. Usually in the old days, a VHS cassette would have like a sticker on it that would say what it is. But both Fred and Pete look at tapes, want tapes of Fred's house, of porno, that don't have any label. It's like mysterious. What's on the tape? Again, these links between the two characters, it's up to you to think about the relationship between Fred and Pete and kind of what's going on there. All right, cool. This is going good. Let's keep going. Also, you'll notice that like there's a moment when Pete is in his house and he like emerges from the shadows, just like Fred emerged from the shadows in his house. And Pete sees himself in the mirror, just like Fred saw himself in a mirror. And what's a mirror? It's a thing that doubles you. Well, if Pete and Fred are the same person, then they've been doubled. Also, don't forget that Balthazar Getty plays Pete, and that Bill Pullman plays Fred, but they're doubled in the, suddenly they're other people when they enter the realm of the movie, but then the movie splits them off again, right? So it's complicated, because they're different. Alice and Renee are played by the same actress, but they're different characters. Pete and Fred are maybe supposed to be the same person on some level, but they're played by different actors. So these are like very different ways of thinking about doubling and copying and the uncanny and doppelgangers and mirrors and the power of film and photography to double things is something this film spends a lot of time on. Cool. When Alice shows up, right, she's got that different hair color, just like in Vertigo. And Mr. Eddie is like the thing that's blocking him from getting to her. Mr. Eddie kind of comes in frame in between him and Alice. And Alice now, Renee wore a lot of black, and now Alice is wearing white when you first see her. So right, this kind of, one's blonde, one's brunette. It's these weird, it's like the same but reversed. And it's a very complicated kind of interesting process to sort of spend time thinking about it. Anyway, Alice and Pete end up in a sexual relationship together. And it is one of the key things is, I think, Pete's ability to sexually satisfy women is different from Pete's ability to satisfy his version of Patricia Arquette, Alice, is very different from Fred's inability to satisfy his version of Patricia Arquette, whose name is Renee. At least one way of thinking about the relationship between Fred and Pete is what Fred wishes he were. Right, that Fred wishes he was young and able to satisfy a woman, and so he becomes Pete, who is able to do these things. So that one way of thinking about it is that Pete is a kind of wish of what Fred would like to be. All right, cool. I'll see you in the next video.